So now it's time to have some fun talking to some creative types. I always love hearing from the creatives, especially cinematographers, because what I find, I think we're in, maybe they'll all agree, we're in the golden age of imaging. And the rules, there are no more rules when it comes to how to shoot, how to frame, how to kind of create a story with images. So I'm really excited about this panel. So Alex, I'm going to turn it over to you. We're going to get into learn about Masters of Corporate Cinematography, which is more exciting than it's ever been. So Alex Lau.
Hello, welcome. This is Masters of Corporate Cinematography. My name is Alex Lau, former working TV cinematographer, now executive producer at Meta. We have a great panel for you today with people who have worked from everything from pre-pro through post, and many working cinematographers. So I'd like to kick it off with Stephen. Just give us a quick intro and a little work history.
My name is Stephen Berke. I'm actually local to the Bay Area cinematographer. I do documentary film, and I do a lot of corporate video, and I do some advertising work, and every once in a while some narrative work. So.
I'm Craig Kief. I'm Los Angeles based. Sometimes I'm a DP. Yeah, I used to shoot more corporate video and documentaries and stuff like that early on, but lately I've been more focused on scripted narrative television and movies.
I'm Matthew Irving. I'm a senior technical specialist for Canon USA. And before that, I was a narrative feature film cinematographer for 27 years, currently based in Los Angeles. I've certainly done my share of corporate videos, and a lot of them are the same kind of flavors you bring to each different kind of production. So really happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Michel Suissa. I'm the managing director of the studio division of B&H. My background is very, very diverse. I've been a cinematographer, I've been a director, I am a proud member of, associate member of ASC, I'm a member of DGA, and I run the professional division of B&H, who serves pretty much every market vertical, but with an emphasis on digital cinema.
May I also add ASC associate member?
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And also, just on a personal note, I didn't get to say this at the last panel, but big fan of what you've done for B&H. Like, it's amazing. And as a client and a friend, like, it's been great to have the studio division.
Thank you. You made this about me now, so I have to go.
And since they're giving kudos, just to mention, Craig is also an ASC member as well. Full member. Okay, so panel on cinematography. Let's start with some visuals. We'll first start with an image from Stephen. So let's bring up the Alice Waters slide, please. So let's first of all talk about what the cinematic look is. So can you just kind of walk us through what you have here with Alice Waters, who's a chef from Chez Panisse here in the Bay Area, and maybe some of the choices you made in getting this image?
Sure. I think, there is no one answer to what is a cinematic image. I think it's kind of a combination of a lot of factors all coming together. But I think, the commonality that you're looking for is you're always looking to tell a story. And so I think, almost more than even like the technical details, what I would say is there's a story going on behind her, and there's even a story going on in the table, and it speaks about to who she is as a chef and as a person, what her values are. And so I think when we look at what a cinematic image is, it's the thing that enhances your story. It's kind of, I would say, almost an ephemeral, but it's all the little pieces, the lighting, the background, the choices you make, even what you focus on. And I think it's all those things that come together to create what we hope is something cinematic.
And obviously there's no one right answer for what qualifies as cinematic and what doesn't, but can you maybe just talk about this specific image? You have a shallow depth of field. What kind of lenses were you maybe using? Did you use any filters?
Actually, no. This was kind of a rough and ready shoot. So this was actually shot on a zoom lens. So it was really about distance and placement is how we kind of achieved the separation more than, say, shooting on a larger sensor or even using filtration. What I did really focus on was the lighting for her. I wanted something that was very flattering, something that would really, enhance her natural beauty. And I think, we wanted to just keep things nice and soft, and also to just really bring life to her eyes because she's a very expressive person. So that was the goal there.
Okay. And what are you trying to communicate about Alice or her restaurant when you're making those kinds of decisions?
Well, hopefully you catch a little sense of all of the fresh ingredients around her. And so she's someone who's all about like locally sourced and about beautiful produce and about beautiful food. And so, you know, obviously there's something, we have to continue that story here, and we have to show, you know, the things that she brings to her restaurant, we wanted to bring to this image. So it was even down to like that bowl of lemons, and Alice is a very particular woman, so every lemon had to be approved before it got on the table in front of her.
Cool. Okay, great. So telling a story. Let's move to the video from Craig, the Apple video, and then we'll talk a little bit about that.
My students are so full of life and love of learning and excited about school, but it's very hard when there's 25 or 30 kids in a class to meet every need. One of the reasons that I was particularly interested in looking at iBooks Author was because in the grade level that I teach, there's not a lot of leveled books on my students' reading level that's nonfiction. In a traditional setting, generally, I am teaching toward the middle. When I got iPads, that was a game changer because then I could meet every child's needs. Using iBooks Author, I can personalize books for that child by putting leveled readers on his or her iPad, and every single child can learn at their own pace. The iPad is such a valuable part of my teaching every day. I truly cannot imagine teaching without it.
All right, so beautiful work. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the choices you made there and what you were trying to communicate about the iPad and the product there?
I would say that we were trying to communicate an aesthetic and a feeling and a more of an emotional experience than a technological experience. You know, obviously a teaching environment is a very, something that is very, very connected personality-wise. And we're trying to minimize, I think, sort of the technology. I'm speaking for Apple now. That's not a great idea. But the technology is enabling a more personable experience in the classroom. And so to do that, creating texture through camera movement, through cinematic lighting, through the choices of the camera and the lenses that we use, all to make it a very organic, beautiful, well-crafted image to come together. Not make it about the iPad, but make it about the whole experience.
Yeah, and I think one of the striking things about that example is that you have the slowly moving camera throughout the entire piece. How do you think that makes people feel, or how were you trying to make people feel through that choice?
I think it just becomes a more engaging image. I think that it's more interesting than a static camera. When you have interesting lighting, interesting things to look at, it becomes more dynamic. And especially when we're trying to capture eyeballs wherever we can for people to engage with a product or with a message that's being expressed. Anything that we can do as a cinematographer to make that imagery more compelling is going to make that person stick around longer before they click on to whatever's next.
Great. Okay, so let's move to the next example from Matthew. So Matthew, can you tell us a little bit about some of the tips that you suggest here in terms of filming on location and how people can make those types of shoots a little more cinematic?
Yeah, absolutely. This particular frame is from a Maria Van Peebles film that I shot back in the early days of digital called Redemption Road, starring the great Michael Clark Duncan. And we came to this cafe, and the script just said they're sitting at a counter in a cafe, and everybody goes in during the location scout, and they go to the cafe, they go to the counter, and they start to, we talk about how we're going to stage it around the counter. But I start to think, the counter, that could be anywhere. That could be a sound stage. We're not really utilizing this. We were shooting this outside of Nashville. And so I turn around. Everybody else is looking into the restaurant. And I decide, everyone turn around. Let's stage this against the window. Let's not be afraid of digital's limitations, which were very limited at the time. And now we luckily have a much larger palette to play with. So we staged it now in front of this window, and people were even worried. I had people saying, well, Michael Clarke Duncan has very dark skin. Are we worried about silhouetting him? And no, we crossed lights. At the time, they were 18Ks through from outside in, and obviously corporate videos aren't going to have 18Ks on the truck. But this is an example of really look around your location and see what's unique about that location. Why are you choosing it? Don't be limited by just what your shot list or what your script is saying. Really look at what's giving you depth, because this window is giving us depth. It's giving us a world behind them. The kitchen was giving Stephen a world behind his subject there, and there was always depth that could show off the motion that Craig was talking about. And talking about motion, we also put this table in the foreground, right here in the foreground, and we were on a slider. So we were slowly creeping the whole time we were in this two-shot, so that foreground table was parallaxing against our actors and slowly moving to show that movement. So this is really about using the location, making sure you say to yourself, could I be on a soundstage right now, or should I be in this location? And always try to put your key light upstage. In this case, the key light is the outside world. It's lighting our actors. So you have a nice silhouetted dark side toward the camera. And this is fairly hard light, but you can wrap it around nicely when you go in for the close-ups if you have the ability to do multiple coverage and not just capture everything at once. But that's it, depth, put light sources upstage, and incorporate some of that nice slow camera movement, and your production design goes way up. The last thing I'll say about this, you can see on the vertical, the concrete vertical here, that at the time in early digital, I had to use some neutral density grad filters in order to capture the outside windows. And luckily now we have cameras that do 16 stops of dynamic range. You can see a couple of those at the Canon booth. And so now we have all these tools to capture this without all of those neutral density filters.
Okay, so here's the big question for the entire group. Let's say you're a brand who's considering moving more into this cinematic look. Why? Why would a brand want to do something more cinematic versus something a little bit more social or some other type of look and feel?
I think the main answer there is really engagement. A striking image just demands attention, and I think in a world where we are, really inundated with faces direct to camera, you need to do something to differentiate and to draw people's attention, and it's not always just good enough for it to be brightly lit and for it to be just, recognizable. And you have an opportunity to tell a bigger story, as I was mentioning with the still of Alice. It doesn't have to just be a background. And as Matthew mentioned, you can tell more through a cinematic image than you can through just, a straight up communication. And so in a world where we are all trying to communicate with each other and we are trying to demand attention, you can't really afford to not take those steps to say, we want to take this to the next level. We want to have an image that demands attention.
It's really in the world all around us. We see cinematic images everywhere we go. And so if you're creating a corporate video, you want it to be out in the marketplace competing with these other images, these high-end images. So because people notice now, people notice a step down. If you're creating corporate content and suddenly it looks different than the movie I saw on Netflix last week, people are going to notice that. So it raises the bar on the content you're creating, and people almost take whatever you're saying and whatever you're creating. Production value does matter. People used to say, oh, it's all about the content, it's all about the script. Production value matters. It matters how people take that in.
I think, if you don't mind, Craig, I think it's important to realize one thing is whether you do corporate, you do television, film, any medium that you're in, I think the key aspect of what we're trying to do is to tell a story, right? And for your story to be successful is you need to emotionally connect, to the audience. And traditionally, culturally, we've been able to relate to cinema, as something that touches us emotionally because of the stories that we're being told that compelling, not only with the writing, but visually. So So I think to be able to replicate that in the corporate world, to show that you have access to the same tools and you can actually write a compelling story and present your images that are going to stand out from the rest of the media consumption, that flies at our faces, on 24/7, I think is really a compelling argument to say we have to use something that we know our audience is going to respond to because it emotionally connects to them visually by reminding them of what they like to see. What we like to see, in the storytelling environment is really people that we can connect to, a message that we can connect to. And I think the cinematic look is really something that achieves that in a far superior way to any other type of camera medium that you would use, for conveying a message.
Damn it, you stole my line. He's absolutely right. Yeah, it's about telling a story, and I think that's, there's the two are not mutually exclusive, right? So every brand has their social look, and some brands have a very cinematic look for different mediums in which the content's going to be displayed. But I think it's, you look at the paradigm of TikTok versus, I don't know what's a film that's up for Oscar this year. Amelia Perez. Let's say that. There's a very distinct difference in the quality of the production between an Oscar-winning film and a TikTok video shot on an iPhone, and both have their place. But the story that you're being told about the brands, when you have a cinematic, compelling, really interesting image, it says something about the brand itself, and that's the reason why you have, especially some very large companies, making very, very cinematic products and hiring people like Hoyta and Mandy Walker and Chivo to shoot their product release videos, is because they realize that compelling imagery is telling a story about the brand as a whole. The other thing too is that with the democratization of technology that's been happening in the last 10, 20 years, the tools that we shoot with, that are available to all of us in this room are the same tools that high-end filmmakers are now being able to use. The bar of entry has gone way down. So now, if you want to shoot with the exact same cameras and lenses and lights that Roger Deakins shoots with, you can have access to all of that relatively easy, whether you're buying it or renting it or hiring somebody who owns it. Those tools are now commonly available everywhere. So then it becomes more about the talent that's behind the camera, both the director, cinematographer, production designer, what have you, art, graphics department, whatever, to then take those tools and then apply them in the best way possible to make the most compelling imagery.
Yeah, exactly. Even with feature films, have shots where they're editing something from a $100,000 camera next to something that came from a $5,000 camera. So Michel, let's say that one of your large corporate customers comes to you and says, hey, we're ready to do this. We want to go in more of a cinematic look for our in-house productions. Keeping in mind what Craig said around democratization of tools, what would your general starting advice be for some of these customers?
I think we'd have to customize, the camera package that we would recommend to the type of stories that this brand wants to tell. I think that's really critical, is to understand, before you actually can talk about technology, you really need to understand the purpose of what the technologies can be used for. And I think that's really critical. It's critical because in the market today, there's over 230 cinema cameras, there's close to 3,000 cinema lenses. So it's really difficult, or it's the opposite. It's really easy to make the wrong decision, right? So I think you have to understand the project before you decide what to recommend. And if someone says, we want the very high end, and we want to look at our images like it is made into a Hollywood film, then of course, that's going to trigger a certain response. If people say, we need something that is going to be relatively economical, but we still can produce images, that have visual presence, then it probably is going to be a different setup. There's no right or wrong. I think there's only the solution for the project is really what we try to approach every single project that way.
Exactly. Okay, so Stephen, let's say for you as a freelance cinematographer, can you describe your pre-production process in terms of how you're choosing these tools? What does your testing look like? What does that process look like?
Sure. I would say it really depends on the client. There are cases a lot of times where like the technology is kind of dictated by the organization. They're heavily invested in a certain format, or their post-production is based around a certain workflow. So there's certainly that side of it that you kind of always have to deal with. But I think it is just a matter of, everything is good in its way. It's about picking the right tool for the job. And, what are you trying to do with it? Like, do you need access in a low profile? Maybe you're shooting on something like a C70 or an FX3, or are you working with a large crew, and do you want all the bells and whistles? Do you have clients watching? Well, in that case, you're upping to like a bigger package. And then beyond that, there is the aesthetic side, which, I'm honestly less into as far as like the cameras, and more probably on the like lens side of things when it comes to like, the look I'm going for, and often that's kind of down to like, am I shooting zooms, am I shooting primes? And again, like, what is the workflow going to be, and do I have like the crew to support all this stuff? It's like all this gear is available, but like, who is going to deal with it is also always another question in any production.
So now for you, Matthew, as someone who has shot a bunch of features and now works for a manufacturer, what would you like other manufacturers to know from a operator DP standpoint that they might not consider enough?
Well, it's interesting because all the cameras are doing such high-level performance nowadays that it really it's almost like picking your film stock. You can kind of make anything look like anything else in post. There's so many tools available to us now. But people gravitate toward Canon for the color science and the skin tones and that sort of thing. But then there's people that just make their movies yellow and teal, and then they go with something else. So really, it's just about listening to filmmaker feedback. That's really what it's all about. And I'm proud to work. I happen to work for a company that really takes that feedback seriously, sends it up the chain, makes adjustments, makes new cameras with that in mind, and delivering those features, because it's about the creator. It's not about some camera company saying, oh, look what we can do. It's about putting the right tool in the right hands for somebody who's developing this amazing creative project. It's got to have this look. It's got to have this dynamic range to capture these environments. There's a creative choice behind all of the tech specs, and that's really it's to keep that communication open between like the tech side and the creative side. That's the most important thing. There's literally nothing more important in camera manufacture.
All right, now, so Craig, let's say that you're joining a new branded project, or maybe even a feature film. Are there any tools that you must have on every shoot?
Crew. I mean, that is the most important thing. Like I can't, we're not writers. We can't sit in front of a computer and create our art. We need a crew in order to help us with these things. Whether it's one person or whether it's 30 people, we need talent to help us do these things. And so that's very important. And a director to enable us that has a strong vision that can enable us to do good work for them. Those are, and the support of the producer as well. Those are all very important things. But, for me, all the mainstream digital cameras are great now. There's not a bad choice out there. I will say we don't need more Ks. Like 4K is good enough. No cinematographer has asked for more than, unless you're shooting plates, has asked for more than 4Ks. We're always trying to dumb down the cameras now. But to me, particularly coming, and then look, and there's a lot of reasons to choose a camera, and resolution is pretty low on my list personally. But for me also, it's about the light. It really is, especially if you're trying to create a cinematic, engaging image. It's really about the quality of the lighting that you're doing, and the color and the texture and the ratios and the quality of making people look good or the product look good or whatever it is that you're going for.
Yeah, just for 2 seconds, just because these cameras are amazing and we can capture an exposure without light, doesn't mean you don't need lighting. Lighting is key. Like good lighting, you can't add good lighting in post. You need a good set of lights, and you need to light on set to get that beautiful eye light that Stephen had in the subject's eyes. To make that spark, lighting is huge.
Yeah, I was just going to add one thing to what Craig and Matt have said is it's really, we should never forget that, beyond the tools, cinematic capture is really a universal language. And I think that's really what needs to transpire here, is that if you understand the basic principles of camera motion, of depth of field, of image composition, of lighting, I think you'll probably be able to write a better story than deciding which camera to actually shoot with. I think that's really the basis of great content, is to understand the language. So know the technology, it's really important, but understand the language is really critical.
Yeah, that's great. And Craig, one thing I want to touch on is you talked about the human side of filmmaking, of being a DP. What would you say are the skills that you need as a cinematographer in 2025 to succeed, in addition to all the technical stuff?
Wow, that's a big question. Yeah. Pressure's on. Gosh, we're in such a phase of transition right now, especially with generative AI and such, that honestly, I don't know. Like, everything is kind of crazy right now, especially in the streaming world, with the global pullback in the industry across all genres and types of filmmaking and television and commercials and everything. So, I don't think I'm qualified to answer that right now. That's a really big question.
I would say that I think, part of maybe being successful in the future is going to be like an embrace of maybe some different definitions. And, like, I have come up in a time when, like, cinematographer was this very dedicated role that, was a specialist in equipment and things like that. And, the lines are blurring. So I do think that there is, some flexibility in, like, what is a cinematographer, what is a DP, and what is a filmmaker now. And so I do think that, like, just in general, there's going to have to be, like, as we are obviously in a time of change, but there's going to have to be some flexibility in these definitions, and, like, what the career path looks like for the future is probably going to be a little different than the career path of, like, us on stage.
That's a great point. And adding on that, a friend of mine, James Laxton, ASC, just spent a year and a half in front of a bunch of computers being the director of photography on Mufasa. So that just shows you, and Barry Jenkins was the director. So no matter what it is that the actual tools are being employed to make whatever it is that you're working on, you still absolutely, it's all driven by the talent that's behind the camera or the animation or whatever.
Yeah, and I want to play off something Michel said also, and what all these guys are getting at is it's important to know your film history. It's important to know the trends, and if you want to emulate a look, there's this huge library of great classic films. Do you want to have like a Citizen Kane kind of look, that chiaroscuro, the really black and white, high contrast, or do you want to go for something like Arrival that's practically log? Like there's such a huge range now of what's acceptable, and some of it's trends. The reality show look was in for the early 2000s, early 2010s, and now suddenly it's all this depth of field, so that even sideline football cameras are using C80s with our full frame sensor on the field to get that cinematic look from a football game. So it's knowing the trends, it's knowing your film history. I talk to a lot of film students that have never seen a movie older than 2000, and it makes me sad. It's important to kind of know. When I was a DP, I had a very theatrical lighting look. I had a very kind of old-fashioned 70s, 80s, 90s theatrical look, and it kind of went out of fashion. And it was one of the many bricks in the wall that I got out of the industry, is because I didn't really do that House of Cards natural lighting thing as well, or I didn't have a passion for that. But that's just know your film history, know your trends, and then mate that with your subject and make sure that your subject calls for that. And it's really, it's about the language, knowing the language and how to apply it.
Yeah, quick plug for Shot Deck, which is a really great online resource to show visuals to the people who you're working with, so you can all be on the same visual page. We're about out of time, so last quick question. We'll go down the row here. Where do you look for inspiration? What kind of work out there inspires you?
Start with me?
Sure, we'll go.
it's so varied. You know, I've been raised in, you know, in different generations. So I've gone, you know, through the birth of MTV all the way to modern filmmaking. So for me, the inspiration is really not just in filmmaking, but it's also another form of art. And I think that's really where it really is critical. As the more cultured you are, the more compelling you can write your stories, because your inspiration is really come out of originality, you know, that is based on knowledge. And the other thing I was going to say is to find inspiration is also key to not be afraid to work with people who are not necessarily part of your community. I think that's really critical, is to broaden your view about how to create something. Maybe you need a cinematographer who's never done corporate. Maybe you need an editor who cuts sports, you know, and maybe you need a VFX artist that does Marvel movies. You know, I think that's really critical, because creative vision is not unique. Creative vision is so diverse, and I think it's really important to us as social animals that the more we generate that sort of exchange of creativity, I think is really where you will find your source of inspiration. If someone says to you, I would have done that shot differently, and instinctively you would say, no, that's not the way I would have done it, and then you'll think about it, you says, yes, that's a better way of doing it. And then all of a sudden you've broadened your spectrum of creativity just because you've listened to someone who does not come with the same background as you.
And actually, I'm sorry to cut in, but I think we're over time, so we'll end on that lovely sentiment. So
that inspires me.
Thank you all.
That inspires me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.